Greetings again, this is Caleb Buckley, and I am on the channel supporting school leaders, and it is a project of Astoria Education Consulting LLC. So today let's talk about inflation. And a lot of people have asked me how schools can prepare for inflation. So I will review what inflation is, whether or not we're in it, how to prepare from it, and my recommendations are a little bit unconventional. So that's why I've made a video of it, so I can send it along to all of you and see what you think and if you agree with me in how to prepare for inflation in a school setting. My conclusion really is that it's not all bad, and there are ways to successfully plan. There are also ways that you can take advantage of as a school leader, especially in a public institution where tax revenues are likely to go up. And lastly, we can take all this into our personal lives and do some self-preparing as school leaders, because if we don't survive an inflationary period, neither will our schools, who's going to lead them after all. I did take off my raincoat because I felt like I weathered the inflation storm already, but I might grab it again if I see inflation falling on us. Because of course we are in an inflationary period. Now the government might say, oh, there's only a 2% price increase, but that is ridiculous. All you have to do is look up the price of a 2x4 at Home Depot or the price of gas at the pump, and you'll see that clearly we are in a period where things cost more. And of course inflation is that you have more money out there chasing fewer goods. So the government's been printing a lot of money to pay off debts. They've been issuing stimulus packages. They've given people money to spend. Also with supply side shortages and lack of economic activity during the pandemic that was followed by skyrocketed economic activity. We've got all these kinks in the supply chain that are really dependent on the supply and demand curve. So that has caused inflation, and that's the part the government's saying is not going to stick around, and I don't believe that to be the case. So we will see some inflation for quite a while. Now there are some things in the school budget you can do to protect yourself against inflation. A lot of schools during the uncertainty of the pandemic actually built up financial reserves, which was great. The issue with all those financial reserves is that they're in bank accounts, and you can't go out as a private investor would and invest in real estate or the stock market or something that's going to be a little bit more resistive to inflation, because you are a public institution and you've got the public funds on your hands. You can't just put it out for an investment, because what goes up can also come down. You can't lose the public trust, public money. However, the good news is your accounts receivable are somewhat guaranteed, because you're going to have state revenue, whereas private schools or other educational institutes like some higher learning institutes have multiple streams of income, not just government funding, and those may be priced out from some consumers. So maybe public schools can take advantage of that. If you look at investment options for public schools, there just aren't a lot. Some people have foundations, or what we often refer to as sidecar nonprofits that can hold public funds before they become public funds. So when parents donate to a school or school foundation, maybe they can invest the money before they turn it over to the school. But again, those are all very small things. There are some wealthy areas where parents have stock options, and they assign the stocks or some type of securities over to the school so to get out of the tax issues themselves, and maybe the school can have an investment that way. But again, let's stick with what's known and what we can control. Now, one of the benefits of inflation is really to debtors. When you're holding money in the bank and that money is worth less every year because the price of goods have gone up, you are losing money due to inflation. But if you flip the coin, and instead, if you are a borrower and you've borrowed money, say at 2 or 3%, and inflation is going up at 4 or 5%, now you've borrowed money that you're paying back with cheaper money in the future. So actually, long-term low-interest debt is a good option for school budgets when you're planning. And what does that look like for schools? That often looks like facility improvements. So since raw materials are going up, probably the cost of labor associated with installing those raw materials are going up. A really good option is to invest in your facility. If you are a school, say you're a charter school and you're looking at property to buy and develop down the road, well, that $8 million project you have in mind now is going to be $12 million 3 years from now. A lot of contractors who work on capital projects, architects, project managers, they're going to be charging a percentage of your total construction budget. And so that inflation is going to be compounded by all the people who need a piece of that pie. So long-term debt, facility projects, capital projects, even major purchases are a good idea, because when the cost of goods go up, it goes up all along the supply chain, which is kind of what we're seeing now. So the cost of a microchip goes up because they're in short supply. Well, that affects the cost of cars. Well, that affects the cost of the consumer coming in, and they might need more credit. Well, that limits the credit, so banks are going to start charging a higher interest rate. The Federal Reserve is going to think the economy is moving too fast. They're going to raise the interest rate. So all along the inflationary supply chain, if you will, you're going to see this compound. Now, as a school, you may have large purchases that you can do that you can amortize over several years. If you're going to replace furniture, if you're going to, a lot of us installed technology during distance learning, but maybe there's some things you didn't get around to yet that you're going to need in the classroom. A lot of schools bought new HVAC systems during the pandemic. But all those things can sometimes be transitioned into a debt instrument that then you can pay back with cheaper money over time, especially if you can spread it over many years. If the inflationary curve is going up and your interest rate is static, it's actually a good time for schools to borrow and do larger projects. I don't know in an inflationary period, if you're in a school district, that voters are likely to approve of a bond measure. When the economies are good, typically neighborhoods can raise money for schools. Even in a recession, sometimes school bond measures have done well, because school bond measures can sometimes appeal to parents and say, hey, the state hasn't given us enough money, so we need to supplement it by approving local revenue. However, in a high inflationary period, your parents have less money and your funding hasn't gone down. So it's a very difficult sell for bond money. So look at borrowing as an option. And the good news is that if the cost of living index increases, a lot of state legislatures have a formula that ties that to education funding. So you can look at your future funding revenue model as having an increase. So maybe your COLA will go up 5% a year if inflation is going up 4% a year. So you're still likely to stay ahead of the curve, because tax revenues are going to increase to the state. As the price of goods increase, people will be paying more. That's going to generate more in taxes, which is usually a progressive tax rate, and that's going to flip back to your state legislature, who in turn is going to pass that along to public schools. So look at the bright side for long-term debt, for major purchases, and for just looking at long-term forecasting and thinking that you're going to have more revenue coming in over time. So how are you going to spend that revenue? Well, a lot of schools, one reason there's not a lot of public funds on the books is that collective bargaining units might look at that and see that as long-term salary money. So it's a very good time to be renewing your salary structure, your salary plan for your different classifications of employees. And if you can do that, then base it strongly on a professional development model. And what that means is that you are investing in your employees who are going to make your school what it is. And by investing in your employees, you're also making a bet against their education inflation over time. So just like you are going to have increased employee costs, if they're going to get credentials, certificates, master's degrees, whatever it is, those institutes of higher learning that grant that are going to charge more for those in the future. So have a good salary schedule that is based on a professional development model. You're going to be hiring a lot of new teachers with the labor shortage, and you're going to want to invest heavily in their education now, because that $4,000 certificate program or mentoring program is going to be $8,000 4 years from now. And that will also help guide those teachers through, or any of the employees, through the progressive steps on the ladder of the schedule. Let me check my notes here, see if I got everything. And yeah, I think increasing your targets for fundraising is also good, even though sometimes in an inflationary period, parents give less because everything around them costs more. Food costs more, energy prices are higher. At the same time, if they can leverage for salary increases in their own private industry, you can often appeal to them for higher giving targets over the year. And lastly, I just want to say that you have to take care of yourself as a school leader. And a friend of mine was recommending, that this is a good time to buy clothes, a good time to buy shoes, a good time to buy things for yourself that are those bigger ticket items. If you need a new computer, a new printer at home, you're putting together your home office, this is the time to invest that and deduct it on your taxes before inflation kind of runs away and all those articles are much higher, but the tax write-off isn't any better, and the home office deduction, kind of stays static. I also just want to add on a personal note that education itself is really not a quantitative business, it's a qualitative business. And really, education benefits not from funds alone. So look at the ways that you can add a qualitative difference in your school community through your budget that are not purely financial. Same with your own house at home. Of course, I recommend getting a chicken and a garden and preparing for the food inflationary factor that way. Maybe your own schoolyard could handle a couple chickens and have some eggs that you can sell in your farmer's market out on your school parking lot. But seriously, though, you do want to prepare your home situation to deal with inflation. Give professional advice to your teachers about dealing with it, and try to see the positive sides of how your school can prepare for long-term inflation and just everything costing more. Be better prepared. Thank you very much for tuning in. Leave me some comments of how you think your school budget can prepare for inflation, and I'll come back, a year from now when the inflation's kind of run away with my I told you so video, but also adding some more advice that I've received through the comment section. Thank you very much, Caleb Buckley, for supporting school leaders on how to prepare a school budget with inflation. Thank you.